As you just heard a few moments ago, Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson insists the Fed's new legislation on what they call sustainable jobs, but what used to be called a just transition, doesn't mean the end of the oil patch. Does their plan do enough to address concerns from resource-based provinces, and will it actually work? The Front Bench panel is here to talk about that. With us this evening from west to east, former British Columbia Premier Christy Clark. She's now a senior advisor at Bennett Jones. Former Alberta Premier Alison Redford. She's now the principal at the Redford Group. And former Nova Scotia Premier Darrell Dexter. He's now Vice Chair of Global Public Affairs. Hi, everybody. Good to see you tonight. I appreciate you making the time. Alison, I've got to start with you. In Alberta, the heart of where the so-called just transition was getting a lot of backlash, and certainly has. I think you had a chance to listen to some of what the minister said. I was certainly, and I remarked even during the interview, taken aback at the degree to which he was insisting that there was a long lifespan for the oil patch, even beyond 2050, for example, and the net zero goals there, because I don't think that's the impression that the federal government had created earlier. What was your take on the tone around the legislation today and from the minister?
Well, I think the tone is quite conciliatory because we had a plan at the beginning of the year that is now in legislation, but there's not a lot of difference between what that plan was and what the legislation looks like. As you pointed out, we're not clear on what will actually happen before 2025, which is after the next federal election. And he is coming out next week to see Premier Smith. So I was pleased to hear that he thought that there would be Alberta representation on that council. I do think that this legislation is very aspirational. And I think, Vassy, you made a very good point in asking him whether or not, if you're an oil and gas or petroleum worker in Alberta and you want a job in 15 years, are you going to have to move to Ontario to work in an electric vehicle plant? Because that is something that we've seen as a dynamic. Certainly, you know, the federal government has been very prepared to invest in the auto industry, certainly very reticent with respect to oil and gas. And despite the language, I think there's a lot of concern in Alberta, which I share, with respect to where we go. I mean, he did talk later about the difference between combustible petroleum versus non-combustible. But at the beginning, he said, petrochemicals are mainly a transportation fuel. And I wrote that down because we don't believe that's the case in Alberta. And we're very prepared to build a plan that allows for that transition to happen. But, you know, his default is still that oil and gas is about transportation. It's certainly about more than that. Albertans know that. But there's got to be a better way to do this than the kind of imposition that the federal government's put in place.
Sort of picking up on some of what Alison said, Darrell, the part of the plan today that was introduced that kind of stuck out to me was the fact the specifics of the plan might not come until the end of 2025. And the reason why that stuck out to me is because if I am somebody, and that's why I kept saying to Mr. If I am someone sitting there right now wondering if I have a job in 5 years because of what's to come, how do I know the specifics of what my next job might look like, or if there will be one for sure? Because it's not there at this moment. Do you think there is an incentive for the government or impetus for the government to come up with those details sooner?
Well, it's always a balancing act between, as Alison said, having kind of aspirational legislation and actually doing the proper level of consultation, you know, communicating with your partners in the provinces, specifically in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and bringing confidence to the process that demonstrates that that people are being listened to, that the advice that they're receiving is the best possible expert advice to move the legislation forward as fairly as possible. And don't let me say I very much kind of understand the anxiety that might exist in Alberta and in Saskatchewan around the prospects of job losses. But the country is in very much a no-win situation with respect to this. I mean, you cannot ignore what's going on in the rest of the world. You cannot ignore the fact that the economy is essentially a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. You have to have, you have to deal with the environmental consequences of climate change. We are looking at a broad spectrum of effects on the Canadian economy, including the fact that other countries will start to bring in carbon tariffs, which will mean that if your products are, manufactured with carbon-intensive processes, it'll be much more expensive, perhaps even uncompetitive, to be able to export those products into other countries. So the federal government has to balance a lot of considerations here. I think doing it in a stepwise fashion is a reasonable approach.
Do you think that, Christy, a lot of this is going to be about getting buy-in, right? And Alberta, the Alberta under this provincial government is, they, like I said in the introduction to the other segment, kind of lambasted the first iteration of that plan that came out in February, said that it was basically saying that, there will be an end to the oil patch, that those jobs will come to an end. The minister made great efforts to try and kind of walk that back or dilute that message tonight. But do you think that there will be a high level of reception to it, I guess, in Alberta or elsewhere where their resources are?
Vassy, I'm from British Columbia, the first province to introduce a carbon price in the country, and we were awarded, all kinds of accolades from the World Bank and the United Nations for the work that we did on that. So I'm a great believer that we need to fight climate change, but I will tell you that this federal government's message to Albertans and Canadians is consistently premised on the idea that they want to shut down the oil and gas industry. We all remember the Prime Minister talking about that. At one point, he hasn't said it since, though, after the response that he got. But which is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. 40% of the emissions in the world come from coal-burning plants, many of them in China and India. We need to be able to supply them with cleaner burning fuels like natural gas, so that we can help them reduce their emissions profile by 50% just by changing the fuel that goes into it. So we produce high wage jobs, nobody's enslaved, we make sure that it's done under high environmental standards, and we produce products that are cleaner than the ones that are, for the most part, polluting the world the most. We all share that air. So, to me, it's just a crazy premise to work from, that we want to shut down the oil and gas industry in Canada when we can think of them as transitional fuels that will help the planet be a lot cleaner. So I don't think if there isn't much reception for it and people, amongst people in British Columbia, I don't think you're going to sell it to people in Alberta.
I would note, Alison, that the minister tried to counter that perception, certainly, but I understand also why it exists. You're all experienced politicians. At the end of the day, the constituency of voters that help get the Prime Minister elected in all these elections are people who really do believe that there needs to be a transition away from oil and gas in order to achieve climate change objectives. They don't necessarily believe what Christy just said. The Prime Minister doesn't have a lot of votes to win in Alberta, nor does he have a lot of votes to win in Saskatchewan. He has more, I guess, out in BC. At the end of the day, is it and I think also beyond just the political question, he came to the office with a message on climate change. Like it seems from the outside that that's what's important to him.
Yeah, well, for sure. And, I don't want, we always have this federal provincial discussion where Albertans are characterized as not understanding and buying into that. We are committed to that change. Mm-hmm. As we've talked about today, it's about how we do that and how we build the trust and how we have the dialogue. I mean, we saw a pretty interesting provincial election here where a lot of people in urban centers talked about the fact that they cared about these issues. It's just a matter of how we work and build on that. And I think it's very possible to do it. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement in terms of what the goal is, but getting there has to be something that's collaborative.
Is it possible? Is there political incentive to be collaborative, though, Darrell? Because often it works for the Prime Minister to be at odds with someone like Danielle Smith, and often it works for Danielle Smith, the Premier, to be at odds with someone like the Prime Minister.
Well, yes, of course, that is true. There are, political fights that are, are worth having, depending on where your constituency is. However, I think it's, even if, Christy's position is correct, and you are continuing to produce for the purposes of the transition. At some point in time, the transition ends, and you end up in exactly the same position that you would be in today. So it is, of course, the right thing to do to try and prepare for the end of that transition, however long it should happen to take. And I think the best that you can do on this on these kinds of issues is to have kind of solid public policy with solid goals that says we are going to have a collaborative process, that we are going to properly consult, and we are going to be respectful of the fact that the people who work in this industry continue to need jobs. They continue to be able to feed their families, and ultimately that needs to be clearly understood to be the objectives of the initiative and legislation that the government has presented.
All right, Christy, last word to you on this.
Well, let's not lose sight of the fact that Alberta provides, through its oil and gas industry principally, a huge amount of money to all Canadians that we use to fund healthcare and programs that we all depend on. Should this dream of shutting down the oil and gas industry in Canada come to life anytime soon, we are going to all hurt as Canadians. And this is a very complex issue. There's lots of layers to it. And I know the government likes to present it as something really simple. It isn't. And we should all remember how important Alberta is to all of Canada.
All right, I appreciate the discussion and the nuance to it tonight. Thank you so much to all three of you, Alison, Redford, Christy Clark, and Darrell Dexter. Thanks, guys.